Terror in southern Africa, killing thousands, displacing 1 million, and preventing development of a lucrative gas industry. Daesh-linked militants are causing chaos in northern Mozambique. What's behind these empowered insurgents, and can they be curtailed? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is Daesh in Mozambique. Well, Daesh may not be the force it once was, but by no means has it disappeared, especially in Africa. For the past 5 years, the terror group has been wreaking havoc in northern Mozambique. Since 2017, more than 4,000 people have been killed in militant attacks, and almost 1 million have fled their homes. Here's a look at some of the terror group's most brutal attacks over the past few years. In September 2018, 12 people were killed and 15 injured after Daesh militants attacked civilians in Cabo Delgado. Less than 2 years later, 52 people were murdered in the village of Chitashi in the Muidime district after refusing to join the terror group. In November that same year, more than 50 people were beheaded in Nhachote village. The following month, militants shot and killed 14 civilians across 6 villages. And in March last year, the terror group attacked and killed several people over a 3-day period in the town of Palma. Now, the unrest may be taking place in Africa, but the resulting instability is also a global concern. Mozambique sits on one of the world's largest gas reserves. And with Russia's onslaught on Ukraine, energy prices have hit record highs. Tapping into the African nation's resources would not only boost Mozambique's economy, but could help ease the energy crisis worldwide. Well, governments in the US and Europe have been helping Mozambique take on the terror group. And last year, Rwanda and the Southern African Development Community, or SADC, launched a military operation to assist the country in that fight. And they have had some success.
But since the coming of Samim forces and the Rwandan security forces, the situation has stabilized in a big way. You will know that Palma and Musimba de Praia is now under control of Rwandese forces. All the known terrorist bases in the areas where Samim operates were overrun, and the terrorists fled those areas.
So joining me now to talk about the causes and consequences of Daesh and militancy in Mozambique are from Maputo. Luis Nhachote, he's the executive coordinator of Mozambique's Center for Investigative Journalism. Alex Vines joins us from London. He's the director of the Africa program at Chatham House. And also from the British capital is David Otto. He is the director of the Geneva Center for Africa Security and Strategic Studies. Thanks all so much for being with us. Let's go back to the beginning just briefly and look at how this movement took hold in northern Mozambique. Luis, they didn't come out of nowhere. There were already thousands of disenfranchised Mozambicans who were kind of ripe for radicalization. Is that not true?
Yeah, we are in the month of October now, and this conflict starts in October in 2017. It's 5 years now, and the causes of this conflict still are part unknown since the beginning. But because there is no counterpart who can argument for what they need since this beginning. Our president, since this conflict, he once told in Pemba that he needs the faces for these insurgencies in order to have a conversation with them. But since then, nothing happens. Nobody knows much about the faces of this insurgency. But the causes are lots since the discovery of the mineral resources, oil and gas, and so on in Cabo Delgado. There is a lot of inequality across the province. The IDP, the GDP, it's highly, but the share of resources for the common people, it's not reflected on their table.
Right. Alex, let me turn to you. I mean, how much do you think these militants are actually ideological extremists versus, well, disenfranchised people making up a kind of a criminal rebel gang?
Look, it's a real mixture. So academic research, including from Queen's College in Belfast, has shown that radicalization of individuals started at least in 2012, but possibly going right back into the early part of this millennium, with preachers from both Kenya, Tanzania, and returning Mozambicans that have been radicalized, beginning to kind of preach radical philosophy in the madrasas and mosques. And so it is 5 years ago that this conflict became violent. The drivers then for people to join the insurgency have been a mixture: organized crime, radical Islam, deep sense of disenfranchisement, particularly triggered also in the clampdowns by government on artisanal ruby mining. So all of these things have created the crisis that we now see today with the million displaced that you've been talking about, and at least 4,000 dead.
So how much does the actual command structure of Daesh control what these militants do?
Look, I think Daesh, IS is a flag of convenience, that most of what is happening in northern Mozambique is about Mozambique, and that it's a kind of sub-regional problem. So there are strong connections into what's happening across the Ruvuma River, which is the border with Tanzania. So what happens in the very south of Tanzania also has a bearing on what's occurring. There is evidence of a number of individuals, a small number of individuals from Daesh having been involved, but the stronger connections are, for example, with another Islamic armed group that is affiliated to Daesh in eastern Congo, the Allied Democratic Forces. And again, most of what drives them is about local issues, rather than anything tied to Daesh itself.
So Alex, where are they getting all these weapons and supplies from to keep this insurgency going? Well,
actually, the research is showing now that a lot of the equipment is from the attacks on government police stations and the Forças Armadas de Defesa de Mozambique, the Mozambican military. So that's where the most significant source of weaponry has derived from. There has been some supplies coming in through dhows along the East African coast from the Comoros Islands, but much smaller in proportion. So again, much of this is homegrown. It does have solidarity, and Daesh certainly is using it as a propaganda tool. So going on to Daesh websites or reading their publications, they very much highlight what's going on in northern Mozambique. But the reality is much of this is homegrown and driven by a logic inside Mozambique itself.
Okay. David Otto, in turn then, how much does Mozambique lose in development and investment right now as a result of all this, not least in the gas and energy sector?
I think beyond, the development and the economy, I think, first of all, as a country, the devastating nature of the insurgency, it's a critical loss. People have been displaced. People are fearful just because of the terror, but also the uncertainty that surrounds the counterinsurgency operations. We very much know that beyond the Mozambican, military and police forces, we have the deployment of SADC in Mozambique, and of course of Rwandan troops as well. So there is also that aspect, that the Mozambican government, in one way or the other, does not have a full grip of its territorial boundaries, which means that it does have foreign states. Now, from an economic perspective, we all know that Mozambique, especially the Cabo Delgado region, is one of the largest gas reserves, and also ruby. But not just that, other mineral resources. That because of the insurgency, it becomes very challenging.
Right.
And location matters a lot here, because this is the area where the Macha Babus, as they call them locally, or Al-Shabaab, as they are known because of, some thoughts that they do have members from Somalia and Al-Shabaab, but also from Kenya and Tanzania. These groups are so much, they've embedded themselves, within an area that, should be very beneficial.
Right.
But I think it's quite important to have notice of that, yeah.
Let me ask Luis. I mean, obviously, you're in Mozambique, you are Mozambican. What do you feel your entire country as a whole is actually losing because of this insurgency?
Last year in December, we had a small movement of this jihadist movement into Niassa. This is the next district in the northern Mozambique. And on past months, this goes down to Nampula province. But I think it was a part of strategy of this jihadists in order to spread the military forces to look at them for another parts. But actually, it's something that keeps everyone really concerned across the country, because this conflict is only taking place in Cabo Delgado. It's looking because who's running this country is come from.
Looks like we're having some trouble with Luis's line there.
That's a president's tribe, and the Cabo Delgado also is a.
Okay, Luis, I'll tell you what, we're going to see if we can correct your line, and I'll come back to you. Alex, if you can try and pick up on what Luis is saying, and tell us where you think the solution could lie. I mean, taking obvious military action is one part, but this, as you said, this has to come from something more organic inside of Mozambique and its government and its leadership, addressing disenfranchised people and helping them also benefit from the very rich mineral resources that are particularly in the north of the country.
So a couple of points. One is that since August last year, as both Louise and yourself said, there's been significant military support for the Mozambican government. Prior to that, the Mozambican government had used private military companies, mercenary groups, including one that TRT talks a lot about, the Wagner Group. That was a spectacular failure. The Russians had to leave. And then President Nyusi, the president of Mozambique, I think cleverly went to Kigali, the capital of Rwanda, and asked the Rwandans whether they would support his military, which is what they did last August 2021, and also accepted a force from the regional body, the Southern African Development Community. And the reality is the security has much improved. Louise was trying to explain how there had been spillover of this conflict into neighboring Niassa province and the neighboring Nampula province early this year, but that was because of the pressure that the insurgents are under. Now, you're absolutely right. There is no military solution to this. The solutions are developmental, and they're about better governance, institution building, and alternatives. But there is a military component, which is there is a small core of very radicalized individuals that will need a military solution to deal with them also. So gradually we will see an improvement, but I don't think that there'll be full security in Cabo Delgado for many years, probably a decade or over that in an optimistic scenario. This will take time.
You know, part of the development is, of course, sharing the benefits of having these resources there. And that really hasn't been done well in a number of countries around the world. Let me just ask you, Alex, quickly, and David, I'm going to come to you in a second. Would you compare the kind of economic damage that this insurgency is doing, Daesh, particularly in Mozambique, with what Boko Haram, for example, has done to Nigeria?
So there are some similarities with Boko Haram in that the government security forces really struggled and exacerbated the situation, although I do think that gradually with training the Mozambican armed forces are definitely improving, and there is a very good Minister of Defense, Minister Shum, who is leading this now. But you're absolutely right, the economy has been particularly impacted. The gas in particular, that's a $20 billion investment that Total Energies declared as force majeure last year, And then Exxon is still considering on whether to declare final investment decision on its part of the future gas project in Mozambique. So that's delaying money for Mozambique. And it is therefore very significant for a country that is one of the poorest in the world. Hence the forensic attention both internationally but also within Mozambique of how to find a solution to this, or at least an improved security situation to the point that Total Energies can reverse its force majeure and Exxon can decide that it makes its final investment decision that has been postponed now for over a year.
Right. And David, if you can broaden that out, I mean, how much is this actually costing the world right now? Mozambique has gas reserves on par with Russia that can't be accessed because of violence and instability, and then Russia's supplies are now limited because of sanctions. If Mozambique could open up and develop these fields, how much would it change the energy equation globally?
Of course, it would change it significantly. In terms of numbers, I don't know, because of course it's a matter of if and when. The insurgency is not something that you can extinguish, very quickly and take advantage of these, the chaotic situation in Russia and Ukraine, which is causing the gas and energy crisis, and leverage that with what is happening in Mozambique. I can tell you, that with experience on how insurgency groups operate, by no means, this is going to be a short crisis, especially with the fact that, there is an overwhelming concentration by the Mozambican government, but also by SADC on ensuring that it wins the war in the battlefield first. But by no means this is going to be a lasting solution. They will have to, deal with the underlying causes, the marginalization, and as Luis mentioned earlier on, this began as some kind of an ethnic situation where the Makunde, an ethnic group, which is the group of President Yuse, was much more opposed to the Wani and the Makwa ethnic groups. And this means that we're looking beyond the ideological component. We're also looking at, some cultural implications here. So it's not going to be, something that we can quickly, deal with and then hope to then have access to the huge amount of gas reserves. It will take time, but there is room for optimism.
Yeah, Luis, let me ask you, first, if you want to comment on what David's analysis was there, and then if you had the proverbial magic wand, to direct the government and what steps to take next, what would you want to see Maputo do to help restabilize these areas in northern Mozambique?
Since the beginning, we have miscommunication from our government. Recently, our Commander-in-Chief of Police, even the President, when they delivered their statements regarding these conflicts, so they brought more confusion to the people. And that's the first step. The government has to have a good communication within the population, with the people. That's the first step. And then the second one is to solve the inequality between the cities in Cabo Delgado. So part of this conflict it's because of the lack of opportunity for the local ones. And when the multinationals starting digging, making day operations in Cabo Delgado, most of the local people was kept out. And they saw people from capital, from other parts of the world, come and take the job where they thought that this job is from them. So this is very important. The government has to do something more clear to solve the inequality in Cabo Delgado, poverty, and give jobs for the local people.
Right. And Luis, I have to raise this with you. I mean, kind of ironically, all of this is happening in one of the most scenically stunning parts of the continent. I mean, you have pristine coastal landscapes, easily compared to, the tourism mecca of Zanzibar. How much is actually being lost as far as, basic tourism development is concerned that could potentially employ thousands of people who wouldn't need, engineering skills, for example, that some of the mines might require?
we have to learn from other countries some parts, a part of how they acquire the knowledge for managing the country. For example, Angola in the past year, they sent lots of young people to study engineering and oil and gas. In the other countries, we have that knowledge. So the government of Mozambique has to do that with the local people, especially the youth people in Cabo Delgado. You have a lot of people with a 12th degree, that's the last on secondary school before they go to university. And those people has to go to outside and learn about that in order when they back home and they be part of the process.
Right. So there's a value add there. Alex, I can see you agree.
Yeah, I'd like to add on tourism. It's really important to develop that further. So the Mozambican government is reforming its visa regime to make it much easier for tourism visas, because that's been a big problem. I myself went further south for vacation in August to the Bazaruti archipelago. There's a much better system there. It's co-managed by African Parks. But the hotels are pretty empty, so getting people in will be really important. And I do think that Cabo Delgado has a great future with the Carimba Islands and Ibo Island. And so you're absolutely right. This has to be part of the solution longer term. But you need a security guarantee first that tourists feel safe, and that's the key issue.
Right. Go ahead, David.
I mean, absolutely, that's right. I mean, as Alex and Luis said, there is no way that the tourism industry can flourish in the back of insecurity and uncertainty. I think what again, I go back to the drawing board. There has to be a comprehensive strategy for the government to leverage on what is losing at this point in time, as opposed to what it could gain if it does have a very sustainable strategy. And I think that strategy, again, goes back to ensuring that, the underlying causes of this conflict, the level of marginalization, inequality, underrepresentation, ethnic clashes, but also, the influence and development of the region. I mean, if people feel that they're vulnerable because of, the inequalities, then, of course, they will prefer to be part of, spoilers. It's down to the government, but I think that perhaps with the help of the regional forces and the international community, one step at a time.
Right. I mean, Luis, I'll finish with you because and I said somewhat ironically, because to see this kind of tragedy and violence that you're seeing in northern Mozambique, where you have the ultimate riches of this planet geographically, not just the mineral wealth, but scenery that, I'll repeat it again, I mean, some of it is just unmatched. How much is just being squandered right now because the government hasn't invested the way it should in its own people?
Yeah, I forget to mention that also a part of this mention, Alex Vines, the Pemba, the capital of Cabo Delgado, is also as the third largest bay in the world. So one of the most important places for tourism is also the capital with a beautiful beach. And
yeah, I would say, I mean, it's just so much is really being lost.
Yeah, that's a lot. The damage in the economy of Cabo Delgado, it's huge. And it's a big contrast because when you saw, for example, we have a mining company stocked in London Exchange, that's Gemfields. It's a joint venture between Gemfields and a local war vet, a well-respected general. So they're making huge of profits every year. I think this week they're going to tail end.
Okay, we seem to have lost Luis's connection. Okay, Alex, quick final words. We have just less than a minute left.
There's no military solution to the Cabo Delgado crisis. Security is part of the solution, but development is a major part, and having more equitable development, particularly in Cabo Delgado.
If the government were to step up its game right now, knowing something about the people in power as you do, what kind of timescale would they need?
The government recognizes now that it needs to get development in, but it's difficult. It is a complex security situation.
Yeah.
And the government faces a problem that when it has recaptured areas and districts of Cabo Delgado, bringing back the state is really difficult. It's still fairly insecure and the conditions are not great. And so even getting civil servants to return, to restore services, that's a tough ask at the moment.
Alex Spines, that will have to be the final word. I'd like to thank all of our panelists really so much for being with us on this edition of The Newsmakers. Our viewers, of course, for tuning in as well. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.